off then talking about how you actually sign up for the test. So, I mean, these are kind of some of the important things. Here's where you sign up, ets.org. ETS stands for Educational Testing Service, and they do quite a few different tests. Some of you may have to take the TOEFL. It's the same people. If anybody's here is a teacher, they do the Praxis, maybe Praxis takers. So they're very professional about this whole stuff, all this stuff, just like a college is going to be. So one of the things that often comes up, students ask, is about accommodations, right? So a lot of people need accommodations for testing, and they have plenty of accommodations available. And they have things like extra time, extra breaks, time and a half, double time, all those things. And actually, if you get accommodated on the real test, they'll even give you accommodations on your practice tests that you do through the website, so that you're taking the test just like it's going to be on test day. By the way, if you are going to be asking for an accommodation, it is a process, of course, so it takes a little while. So get that started right away so that you're in process. They're going to look at things like doctor's notes and that sort of thing. So, but ETS is great to work with. I may actually take you to their website later. I do a screen share, but it's pretty self-explanatory. You jump on there and then you actually create a free account. And then once you've got the free account, you can do all sorts of things. You can register for the test. You can get all sorts of information, all that stuff. Okay. So the cost of the test is $205. So $205. Ideally, that means you probably just want to take it once. But I've definitely known people that have taken it many times. If you need to take it 5 times to be able to get the score you need, well, that's what happens. But then you're $1,000 into it. So probably don't want to do that. The way you actually do this is they actually just literally have a calendar and available test dates. Now, we are living in 2021 and still at the tail end of our pandemic. So right now they have a special accommodation. This is a temporary thing, but you can actually choose to take the test at home. They will have a proctor watching you and everything. They have special things like you have to move your camera around, show them the room, and they have to be able to see you the whole time and all sorts of things. So if you want to, you're able to take it at home. Now that is temporary and we don't have a sense yet how long that's going to last, but typically you take it at a testing center. Okay. By the way, if you take it at home, there's a weird restriction, and that is you can't have scratch paper. But you have to be able to write stuff. So their accommodation is you can actually have a personal whiteboard with white, dry erase markers like I'm using here, and then erase after every question. Not as good as just having scratch paper, but that's their accommodation. But I'm going to actually describe it as if you're taking it at a testing center, which you already can, but probably within, by the end of the year, I would guess, is what your only option will be. Now, the testing centers are often just at schools. Like locally, like if you're at Utah State, you can take it there. Probably Idaho State in Pocatello, if anybody's there. University of Utah, I believe, does it, but not every school does it. I took my test in Utah County, and I had to take it at a testing center in Linden, off 1600 North. And it's literally just an office building down by the freeway. And so I want to actually now describe kind of what it's like on test day. So you show up. For me, I always show up like a half hour early just because I'm paranoid about my car breaking down or something. So I show up a half hour early. And I sat out in my car and reviewed some vocabulary words, and then I went in. So I was in at least 20 minutes before my check-in time. Guess what they did? They just checked me in and got me into my test. So, you don't want to be late, but being early is apparently not a problem. Now, you will just walk into their kind of reception area. So imagine just a reception desk. And there's some nice people behind the desk, and they're going to check you in. Now, you're going to have to use your official ID. Driver's license is allowable for US citizens, but if you're a foreign national, you'll have to have your passport. Then, by the way, this might sound silly, but you've got to make sure the name on your official ID matches exactly the name you used to sign up on the ETS website, because they won't let you take it if it doesn't match exactly. I know that because it happened to the lady in front of me in line. She was from Peru, and her name was just not quite exact. And they're just like, nope, you can't take it. You got to get this whole thing fixed, which I'm sure is going to take all sorts of hassle. And so just try to, whatever your official ID says, copy that.
Does that include like middle name as well?
So I do not believe so, but I don't remember having to enter a middle name. But and by the way, addresses don't matter. They know that you're college students moving around all the time. But yeah, your actual name has to match exactly. Now, those nice people behind the desk are actually your proctors also. So before they let you into the testing room, they are going to make you take all of your belongings and put it in a locker. Okay. You'll basically have your official ID and your locker key with you. That's what you'll be walking around with for a few hours. The test is about a 4-hour test. Now, they're serious about the stuff you can't have. So you cannot have a hat. You can't have jewelry other than a wedding ring. Seriously. So no bracelets, earrings, necklaces. Nope, they're not going to let you have it. They're really strict about jackets and coats. They'll let you wear it in, but then you're not allowed to take it off or while you're taking the test. But so they have all these strict rules. But by the way, they will also run you through some security. So expect to have your picture taken, obviously. You may have a fingerprint done. You will have to stand with your arms out, and they take a wand and go up and down. Then you have to turn your pockets inside out to show there's nothing stuffed in your pockets. If you have long pants on, you have to lift up your pant legs so they can see that there's nothing stuffed in your socks. And I'm not joking, by the way, it is this intense. Now, most of you are used to taking tests at testing centers, but it's just a step above, right? Okay, so you get through that whole gauntlet. They also provide you with your scratch paper and pencils. You actually get paper and old number 2 pencils, and they walk you back into the testing room. Now, the testing room is just a room full of computer workstations. There's little partitions between each one. It depends on the testing center, honestly. Mine actually had a really nice partition. You couldn't see anything. But now this is a mostly quiet room. You've probably taken, like I said, tests at testing centers. You know what it's like, but it's not perfectly quiet. There's going to be people coming in and out of the room. And there are whispered conversations that have to go on because they have to get people set up on the computers and stuff. So it's not perfectly quiet. So one of the nice things that they've done for us then is they've actually provided headphones at every workstation. They are not modern noise canceling stuff. I think they're from the 1980s. They like have wire rims and stuff, but it's nice if you want to block out a little bit of the sound. I do believe you can actually ask for the little roll-up ones too, if you want to ask for them. That's not a guarantee though, so but you can ask. All right, any questions so far as I've kind of set the stage?
Actually, kind of. So I got married last year and I was about to start changing my name because COVID has made that a long, hefty process. I guess my question for you, I was looking on the website and I couldn't really find anything about what to do if your name changes before you take the test because I can't register under the other name because legal documents, it totally varies when they're going to actually be printed and I can get IDs and things. So do you have any idea how that process works?
So this is an extra complication during COVID times. I hadn't considered that. I would personally, if I were you, literally get someone on the phone at ETS and ask them that question, because you need an official response. I could guess at what you should do, but I don't want to lead you down the wrong path. So, but I'm glad you're taking this into account, because they're serious about all that. And it sounds like you're aware of it too. And what do you do, right? Exactly. All right. What a crazy time we live in. Has anybody else gained weight during COVID? So I go up and down in weight. And I was, a month or so ago, 25 pounds higher than I'd ever been in my life. So I'm on a diet now. So I'm slowly losing that weight, but yeah, it's a crazy time.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. I get time and a half. And so I know you said the typical time is 4 hours. So I'm assuming it's going to be 6. And I'm just trying to understand, is it time and a half on each section?
Yes,
you know what I
do
mean?
think so. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Which makes a true difference. You know, you'll be able to concentrate, and you know, it's a big difference. So one of the points I will make as we get into the test is you are actually under severe time pressure. It's part of the test. So if you can be accommodated, don't, you know, take advantage of that. Schools will never know that you were accommodated. They'll just see your score. Okay. So it's definitely worth your time to do that. All right. So at the computer workstation there on test day, you have a computer, just the monitor, keyboard, mouse pad, scratch paper, pencils, ID, and key, and headphones. That's what you're going to be looking at. The person that walks you into the room will get you set up. Other people will be taking other tests. People will be doing like real estate licensing exams. So it's definitely not a test where everybody starts a section at the same time and finishes at the same time. Everybody's doing their own pace on their own computer. Okay. Now, okay. So we're about to start. The test is 4 hours long. You do get one break of 10 minutes in the middle. What I want to do now is really kind of lay out the test in pretty good detail and kind of the order of everything and all of that. And I'm actually going to go through it 3 times. I'm going to go down and I'm just going to write the sections that you're going to see. Then we'll stop and we'll talk about how all the scoring works. Okay. And then we're going to go through and talk a little bit more in depth on each of the sections. So I'm not teaching essay writing today, but I'm going to give you a few little tips that could help those of you that need them. Okay. I'm not teaching verbal today, really, but I'll give you some tips. And then in math, we will actually do a little bit of the math today. Okay. All right, here goes. The first section you have on test day is essays. So that's section 1. Now, they actually have it broken down into 2 subsections. So section 1 is an hour long, but you actually have 2 30-minute subsections, and you can't save time on one and use it on the other. So they are separately timed. So I'm just going to call it A and B. And that'll be, you have an analysis of an issue as one of your essays, an analysis of an argument as your other essay. Again, we're going to go into detail on what all of those are. So that's section 1. They always start with the essays. I personally would like to have the essays at the end of the test, but they do it at the start. As soon as you're done with the essays, you go straight into the multiple choice portion of the test, and you do sections 2 and 3 immediately. Then you get your break, and then you do sections 4, 5, and 6. Now, 2 through 6 are essentially multiple choice sections, but I hope you've noticed that I haven't labeled anything yet. And this is some of the confusing stuff. So first of all, there are 5 multiple choice sections, but only 4 of them count. There's an entire section that doesn't count. It is an experimental section. They essentially are using you to test out future test sections. And based on your performance, they kind of get it dialed in for the people that take it next year. Okay. Now, that'll be one of these 5, and it can be any of these 5. And you don't know, and you won't know even after the test, which one of the sections didn't count. So every time I do this lecture, I make it a different section. Today, we're going to make it section 6. But again, it could be any of the sections. So that does leave 4 sections that count. Now, of those 4 sections that count, 2 of them are based in math and 2 of them are based in verbal. Okay. Those also can come in any order. So whatever pops up on your screen, you have to be ready for. So I'm just going to now make up one possible order. Okay. How about if you actually get both of your maths right at the start, and then it goes verbal, verbal. Now, the mystery can either be math or verbal. So you'll know at the end of the test, you're like, well, I had 3 math and 2 verbal, so one of my math sections didn't count. That's what happened for me. I had 3 math sections, okay? But I don't know which one didn't count. So now, all of these sections have 20 questions. But they give you a little longer on the math sections. So on the math sections, you get 35 minutes, and the verbal, you only get 30 minutes. So I feel like they're doing that on math because you have to do more scratch work and stuff like that and transfer pictures onto the page and whatnot. So if you're just curious, in math, that means you have 1:45 per average question, and in verbal, 1.5 minutes per average question. Now, I did make the point earlier that you're under severe time pressure. It's what they do, all right? So I'm going to emphasize it, okay? So I'm obviously really good at grad school tests. This is what I do for my career. I know the LSAT, the GMAT, the GRE, and I personally ended up with a perfect score on the GRE. So you're like, oh yeah, he's just really good at tests. Well, yes, but guess what? I didn't have very much time at the end of each section, okay? Maybe 1 minute to 2 minutes I had left, but I had to get through the problems, do them, calculate it, read the passages or whatever. And so that's someone who's, kind of really great at these tests. So now some of you may have those skill sets, definitely, and especially on one of the 2 section types. So some of you are probably really great at math, and others of you are really great at verbal, and hopefully you're great at both. But expect to be under time pressure, and so you're going to have to learn to just max out your score in the time you have. Now, let's talk about how you do that. Because within the section, again, there's 20 questions, but every one of those 20 questions is worth the same amount, and there are no penalties for guessing. So never leave anything blank, okay? But also, don't spend 5 minutes on some monster math question when there's 3 other simple math questions you could get at the same time, okay? You've got to really have the mindset of, I'm just going to get the low-hanging fruit, and as soon as I got all that, then I'll try to get some of these hard questions. Now, you can jump around in the section. The questions are obviously just presented to you 1 through 20, but there's a couple little buttons on your computer screen. One says calculator. You actually get an on-screen calculator for math. But another one says review section. And if you click that, it'll show you all 20 questions, which ones you have answered, which ones are not yet been answered, and then you can jump straight to the question you want to jump to. Okay, so take advantage of that. I do believe you can also mark a question and say, I want to review this one later, and it'll show up on that screen that you wanted it marked. For me personally, I just use my scratch paper to say, I just wrote the questions I wanted to double check. And I did. I went back and double checked things just to make sure. I even changed an answer on test day apparently to the right one. Okay, so questions so far? Pretty intimidating, 4 hours?
I had a quick question, Phil.
Go for it.
So you mentioned that the math and verbal sections could be in any order. So it could be 2 math, 2 verbal, back and forth, or whatever, right?
Yes.
With that, is there any way that you can determine when the break is, or is the break just after those first 2 sections and that's it?
That's it. The break is right here. So, and they always do it that same way. Can I just warn you one thing about the break too? Maybe I'm making this sound like it's really intense, but people get in trouble on the break. So you have 10 minutes. They won't let you go back out to your car, but they do let you get into your locker, and you can have snacks and drinks in your locker. Or, I mean, there's probably a drinking fountain there in the office building. But the number one thing that gets people in trouble, you all have one. It's your cell phone. If they catch you on your cell phone, they just cancel your test right there. You're done. By the way, those nice proctors I told you about, they walk around the hallways of the office building. So they are really serious about all this. So they'll follow you around just to make sure that you're not breaking the rules. Okay, so just watch out for that. Okay, so that's the overall test, 4 hours. Guess what happens at the end after you finish section 6? They show you your score, except for the essays, because the essays actually are graded by a real live person, and that takes a while. But they'll show you your score on the math and the verbal, and they'll also give you your percentile, where you fall on the percentile. Then you get an option. You can either accept it or cancel your score. If you cancel it, you have to click a couple buttons to make sure you're really sure you're going to cancel it. But if you cancel it, it's gone. Okay. So are there any advantages to canceling? Probably not, because schools are just going to take your highest score anyway. So if you have a really bad score out there, just go get a good score, and that erases the bad score. Okay, it's not an average. So, but there's another thing. Once you're actually at the point later that you're applying to schools, if you want to, you can just send the scores you want to send. You don't have to send everything. It's an extra fee, but they call it score select, but then they'll just send the one score. Now you can't pick and choose. You can't choose your best math and your best verbal and your best essay. You have to choose your one best test. Yeah. But by the way, scores are good for 5 years. So like some of you, you'll be doing a master's and a doctorate. So if you time it just right, you can make your scores good for both. You don't want to have to retake the GRE. But also, if you know anybody who's a freshman, you should tell them that they should take the GRE as a freshman, because then their score will still be good when they're applying to grad school. So, but we'll kind of get into that. All right. One more thing I wanted to mention. They do show you your scores on the computer screen, but schools will not see your scores for a couple of weeks, because your score is not official until the person has graded your essay. And so until you get that essay graded, schools won't see it. So don't be taking the GRE 3 days before a deadline, because schools will just think you abandoned your application. Okay? If you do find yourself in a situation like that, just communicate with the schools. That's all it takes, and you can solve all those problems, but communicate. Okay. We're about to move into scoring, unless there's any other questions just about the test in general. Go ahead.
I had a question. How far in advance should you schedule your test taking before? If I schedule now, how far in advance, how far away can I, or how soon can I take it?
So it depends on the schedule. There are times where you could literally schedule it tomorrow. But then I've seen times where you struggle to find an open date. Now, there are also locations where it's harder to take it. If you're like in me, I'm in the Salt Lake Valley. I have lots of options, so I could probably find something within the next week. But if you schedule it, 3 weeks out, you're probably pretty good, and you can schedule it further out if you want to. Okay. Of course, they have a rescheduling fee for like $75. You can reschedule. So they have lots of ways you're going to find out of taking your money. So this is what they seem to be good at. All right, on to scoring. Scoring is a little bit complicated on the GRE. So the first thing I need to tell you is that the GRE is an adaptive test. The test adapts to you based on how well you're doing early on. So here's how that actually functions. It does it by section. So the first math section that counts, so this, if it's an experimental, it's not part of this, but the first math section that counts, your performance on that determines the difficulty of the next section. So think of it as everybody gets the same first section, but then they have a lot of different versions of the second section. And the same thing with your first verbal. Your performance on that determines the difficulty of the second verbal section. The basic idea is if you do really well, then they give you a much harder second section. And if you do really poorly, they give you a much easier second section. And if you're about average, they keep you at about average. So that might feel like a disincentive to doing well, but that's how you access the best scores. Now, here's one way to kind of explain it. I kind of like to think of it as the bell curve. Hopefully you can see my little bell curve there. And excuse me, there's the average score. I like to think of the first section not as an average section, but as a cross section of difficulty section. So even the first section has some monster difficult questions on it, and a lot of easy questions and a lot of medium questions. So it has a cross section. So if you just do about average, then you just stay about average. But what if you just ace that section? Okay, so let's say on your first math section, you get 20 out of 20. You are set up for a really fantastic score. You have already locked down your range. You're already going to be up in this end of the bell curve. You can't fall down here anymore. So then they ramp up the difficulty. Now, the reason they ramp it up is if they just give you a same section, you just still ace it again. But they want to be able to tell the difference between this person and this person. So this is the person that gets a perfect score. They ace the first section and they ace the second section. Here's the person that aces the first section and stumbles on the second section. For example, I had a student on a practice test. This is kind of how we were able to know the actual details. Got 20 out of 20 on the first section. Then they got 11 out of 20 on the second math section. Now that is not accidental. The person didn't forget how to do math. They just got hit over the head with a really tough section. So they're this person. By the way, that translated into a score on the math portion that almost anybody would be happy with. Okay, just letting you know. I haven't mentioned the score range, but it was in the mid 160s. And so an excellent score, even though they got 11 out of 20 on that second section. It felt like they were bombing it. Now, the same thing could happen. You could bomb the first section and already lock down a really bad score. You don't want that to happen, okay? So try to be in this group that locks down the great score, and then they have to determine which of the great people you are. The perfect person or the still really solid person who's not quite perfect, okay? Has anybody taken an adaptive test before?
I've taken the GMAT, which I believe is adaptive as well, but I don't think it's structured quite the same way.
It is structured differently. The GMAT, which I also teach, by the way, I'll be doing that tonight at 6. The GMAT adapts after every question. So it's like every question gets harder or easier based on whether you're getting it right or wrong. I much prefer this in terms of adapting after each section. Okay, so we're now going to talk about the actual scores on the test. You get 3 scores. There's an essay score, a verbal score, and a math score. The ranges here are 0 to 6, 130 to 170, 130 to 170. Okay, those are the ranges. Where they came up with these ranges, I have no idea. This is just a 40-point scale. So I actually have a couple theories why they have a 40-point scale, but they didn't go 0 to 40. One is, and this is going to sound weird, there are 40 math questions. So if they just did a 0 to 40 scale, people would misinterpret it that if you got 39, that means you got 39 out of the 40 questions correct. But it's not like that. It's this whole adaptive thing that I just described. Okay, they're actually trying to put you in a bell curve, literally. Okay, so here's my other theory. Let's say you bomb the test. You get like a 131, 132. You just bombed the test. But when it comes time to tell your parents, you don't have to tell them that you got a 1 out of 40. You get to tell them you got a 131 out of 170, which actually sounds pretty good. So your parents would probably be, good job. That's way better than you usually do. So I don't know, but that's my theory. All right. So let's talk about averages. Essay score is about an average of 3.8. Verbal is about a 151. Math is about a 152. Again, they're going for a normal distribution, but it actually has shifted a little over the years. So it's a little above the 150 on the math and the verbal. And the way it works on test day is they actually just send 3 separate scores onto the schools. There is no combined GRE score. There's just 3 separate scores. Then the school gets to determine what how they're going to use those scores. And every school, and really actually every program within the school, treats these 3 scores differently. So for example, we probably have some engineers here today. People who want to go into a Masters of Engineering. I've seen some engineering programs where the math matters and it matters a lot. You better be up in the mid 160s to be competitive. But they literally didn't even look at these other 2 scores. That is possible. There's going to be a lot of programs that are going to be a lot about writing. And is anybody here going to be in kind of like some of the humanities where they're going to be writing a lot? So obviously the essay and the verbal are going to be really important. But then there's also a lot of programs where, especially if you're going to be publishing, you definitely need to be good at math, even if it's in the humanities, right? You need to understand stats and be able to break down studies and what the numbers actually mean, okay? So you need to actually find out from the schools you're applying to what they want in these scores here, okay? I can't even tell you what a good score is. You need to find out. Has anybody actually done that research already and found out what the scores the school's looking for? No one's jumping in. All right, so, but just know that you'll need to do that, okay? And it really, truly depends on the school and what they want on these 3 scores. Okay? Can I give you an extreme example? About 3 or 4 years ago, I had a student in my Provo class that got a perfect score. He tied me. This was one sharp guy. He was going for PhD economics programs at the top couple schools in the country. Imagine that you're trying to get into a program with people that are going to get Nobel Prizes in economics in a few years. That's the group he was competing with, okay? So he got the perfect score, And then he told me afterwards that well, at least one of the schools he applied to, the median score of accepted students was a perfect score. So essentially, if you didn't get a perfect score, it was already a blemish on your record. Okay. So, and yeah, maybe you're not even going to get in. So that's extreme. But just know that, I mean, if you're going for PhD programs, they expect pretty good scores. Is anybody, how many of you are going for PhD? A few? It's so hard when I can't see you really well. All right, but, okay. So, trying to think if there's anything else I want to mention about scores. Anybody have any questions? You can type them in the chat or just jump in and ask. All right. We are going to move on then.
I've got one question. So I'm looking at grad school in life sciences. Would
Okay.
you say there's a, like, does it just depend on the school, or is, for the most part, are all schools that are accepting grad students for a specific subject, looking for a specific score, or not necessarily score? So that's a bad question. But are they all going to be looking at the same portion of the test typically, or does it just depend on the university?
It really depends on the university. So, like I said about, engineering programs might only care about the math, but there's a lot of engineering programs that require certain verbal and essay scores. So, it's just that they make up their own decision. Their admissions committee, has, kind of put different weight on things.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of show. Go ahead. Sorry.
I'll say something. I'll jump in. So I'm looking at speech language pathology, and most of the schools I looked at, they required 150 verbal, like 149 quant, and then 4 in the essay. So they said that was the average. So they actually were looking for higher verbal than they were for math.
And that makes sense for speech language pathology. By the way, can I just say thank you? Because thanks to someone like you, I can now say my R's.
Oh, well, I'm not there yet, but that's the goal.
Me too.
Yep. I had to go to a speech pathologist, and I remember this is like in the 3rd grade, and I remember I had to have headphones on and say this phrase over and over. The red rabbit ran down the red road. Look how well I remember that, 40 years later, right? So, but I think at the time it was the wed rabbit ran down the wed road. So, but then you can actually hear yourself saying it, and it made a difference. The other thing I wanted to actually mention about scores, a lot of schools will talk about something called a composite score. That just means the math and the verbal added together. So if they ever talking about if you need a 300 composite, you need to average 150, or a 310 composite, you need to average 155, but they're never including the essay. So could you explain percentiles in the context of the scores? Yes. So they're trying to put everybody into a bell curve like this. They only want a few people there, and they only want a few people here. So it turns out when I ended up with my perfect scores on test day, they show you your score, but they also show you your percentile. So I got 170 and 170. Guess what my percentile was? 98th percentile, not 99th. And that's because in a normal distribution, if you know more normal distributions, they're broken down by standard deviations. So they want the bulk of people to be right here in the middle. Like 2/3 of the people are going to be between here and here. And then they want, there's still some people getting these scores, but it's very few getting the top scores. So that's essentially what happens. So your raw score comes out of the test, right? They put it into their number cruncher so that 2% get perfect scores. Another about 14% fall in this category. Another like 34% fall in here, 34% here, and like that. Okay. So remember, the averages are like, in math, it was like 152. A lot of people are talking. So there is the percentiles. This is like the 83rd percentile and the 16th percentile. 2/3 of people will be in there. But even in the middle there, there's this like subgroup here. I would call that the 40th to the 60th percentile. And that is just a big chunk of people that are there. And that's usually 3 or 4 points on either side of the average. So didn't we have someone jump on that said they were a stats major or something? Maybe I'm thinking about somebody else. But yeah, so that's kind of how it works. I don't know if that explains your question. It's complicated. I've literally at different, like a conference once, I tried to corner someone who works for ETS to get them to explain the scoring system. And they were all like cagey about it. They didn't want to give me a direct answer. It was kind of funny. So in some ways, it's a little bit of a mystery, but that's how we understand it there. Okay. So let's keep going. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to spend a little time on essays, then a little time on verbal, and then we will shift over and spend a little time on math and do a little math instruction. Again, remember at the end of class today, we will be doing a little sales pitch for anybody that's interested in joining our class. Okay, so essays. There are 2 essays on the test, analysis of an issue and an analysis of an argument. Those are different essays. They're going to sound different, okay? I want to give you a sense of what they're asking you for. Now, I will be referring to some essay prompts. These are out of the official guide. This is one of the books that comes with our course, but these are all official questions. But here's something else that's cool. Every essay prompt that could be asked on test day is already published online at ETS. They are not trying to make it a secret what their essay prompts are. So you can just go to essay or the essay prompts on the ETS website. They do have a couple hundred of each, okay? So you're probably not going to prepare a couple hundred essays of each kind, but you can get a really good sense of what the essay prompts look like. Now, the issue essay is asking for your opinion. You, the student, what's your opinion about this? And they really actually say it just that way. Discuss the extent to which you agree or disagree with the statement above. And so it's about you, which does mean that if you choose to, you can write it in the first person. You also can keep it in more academic voice. The other essay is definitely academic voice. So this is either first person or academic. Now, I personally have a preference. This is a personal preference. I just keep it in academic voice so that I'm not switching voice when I go back to, to different essays, because that can mess me up actually. Okay. So academic voice is more like a scholarly paper kind of voice is what it's going to sound like. So let me give you an example of one of these. Okay, I'm just going to read this. What they do is they give you a sentence and ask you to agree or disagree with it. So here it goes. As people rely more and more on technology to solve problems, the ability of humans to think for themselves will surely deteriorate. Discuss the extent to which you agree or disagree with that. And of course, you have to give reasons and examples and all of that. Okay? So what you want to do is you want to make several distinct points about the topic. Don't just keep saying the same point over and over throughout your essay. So you need to generate some points. You're going to make several points, and with each point, you're going to illustrate it with a really good persuasive example. Okay? So let's play with that for a second. Well, first of all, can I just tell you, it truly does not matter which side of the argument you take. They don't have very controversial topics. It's like the ability of humans to think for themselves will deteriorate. Okay, I could argue either side. By the way, I actually do have a law degree. I've been professionally trained to argue either side of a case. That's literally what would happen in law school when we were doing the practice. I'd be like, okay, today you're the prosecution, now you're the defense. And you didn't get to choose. You just had to be ready for whatever side they told you to argue. Okay. Now, there really are three positions you can take: for, against, or a nuanced position. I have a strong preference against a nuanced position. Now, that's just for the purposes of writing this essay on test day. And the reason is if you're taking a nuanced position at different parts of the essay, you're saying things that are almost contradictory. So you've got to be a really great writer in order to guide your reader through that. I have read so many essays from students where I'm just reading it and I'm like, where did they get this? They're suddenly arguing the opposite. And I had no idea they were switching sides. So you just got to be really careful with taking the nuanced position. There are, however, times I feel a nuanced position is required. You want to hear one where I think it was required? Okay, this is also here in the book, but I just have it memorized. It says, the best way to teach is to praise positive actions and ignore negative ones. So I could have agreed with it when it was just saying praise positive, but then it had to tack on and ignore negative ones. I don't know if any of you are parents or pet owners or anything, or a teacher. I don't believe in ignoring negative ones, but I like the praising positive. Okay, so if I had to write that essay, I would take a nuanced position, but I'd be careful. Okay. So let's go back.
So
go ahead.
I have a question. To me, it sounded like that prompt was built as like a multi-part prompt. It had several points in it. So I'm wondering if like a strategy to take would be, if I see a prompt with multiple parts, then a nuanced position suddenly becomes an available option.
Absolutely. And really on any prompt, a nuanced position is available. It's just I personally steer my students away from it because I'm just trying to help them get the best score. So the thing is on almost any one of these, I would actually personally have a nuanced position. That would be my actual position in the real world. So like, the one about technology hurting the ability of humans to think for themselves, it goes both ways. It really obviously goes both ways in the real world. But I just feel like that's just so much harder to write. But yeah, I see what you're saying about that and ignore negative ones kind of built itself to have a nuanced argument. Yeah, that makes sense.
Thank you.
So I want to just spend a little time talking about the examples you're going to use on test day. I personally like real world general knowledge specific examples. Even if it's relevant, I don't like personal experience. Sorry. Like you were at the grocery store and the person couldn't figure out the change. Oh, well, okay. So I don't find that persuasive. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to kind of be pulling from an essay. So in the book here, they have examples of essays that got the different scores. So I'm going to be pulling from one that got a level 6, okay? It's about the humans not being able to think for themselves. So the person that got the 6 disagreed. I'm going to tell you one of their points, and I want to see if together as a class, we can come up with some examples. So here's one of their points. They said that remember, they disagreed. They said technology is actually creating new and even more difficult problems for humans to solve. For example, can any of you come up with a new and more difficult problem we're facing now today because of technology?
Well, what I was thinking was we have this wealth of information. So, okay, oh, well, you have all this information at your fingertips and it makes you lazy. But as we can see with the current climate, you have to be really selective in what information you take, because there's all sorts of facts out there, but there's all sorts of misinformation and disinformation. And if you are not canny, if you are looking at the source, if you're not looking at the bias, then you will be misled. And I'm sure there was misinformation and disinformation in the past, but it wasn't coming at you with a fire hose.
Okay.
And
So I love where you're taking this. Can I just tell you one thing that I would think would help improve that example?
Mhm.
Drop some names like Wikipedia or Google searches, or like it turns it into a picture in your mind. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, I had some in mind, like, but I didn't want to get political and say something like that. So I just kept it to myself.
Okay. Rule for everybody on their actual essay on test day. Follow what she just said. Don't get political. Just assume the person grading your essay is on the opposite side of the political fence from you. Okay. So, oh man, sorry. I'm just remembering essays that I've had students turn into me that did get political. So, here's what it said. Consider the case of the amazing president, and I want you to plug in either Trump or Obama and determine whether you think that, and they just went and praised that president and how great they were. But just think, if they were on the opposite side of what you are, how awful that would sound to your ear. Does that make sense? Okay. By the way, JFK is safe, I think, unless you're in poli-sci, but JFK is safe. You can talk about JFK. One other rule, please no Nazis. Don't use that as an example. Okay. So I really like the example she came up with, though. But do actually try to have those specific examples, like Wikipedia, because how many of us, when we hear Wikipedia, can almost literally visually see ourselves typing it in and seeing the web page, and knowing how it's their information is populated and all that stuff. Okay. Yeah, you can really you want to paint a picture as much as possible. That's kind of what I'm going for there. All right, let's talk about the other essay. This is a very different essay. This is the one that's going to really be my favorite, and that's because of all my training in law. You're asked to evaluate someone else's argument. This is an analysis, and it is for sure in academic voice. If you've ever read scholarly journals, this is how it should sound. It should sound like, Professor so-and-so has overestimated the likelihood of da-da-da-da-da. In addition, he or she has failed to account for the possibility that da-da-da-da. It's peer review, okay? So you're just ripping apart someone else's argument. So here they give you a paragraph, and in that paragraph, there are lots of flaws. And when I say lots, I am not kidding. They can pack a dozen flaws into a single paragraph. There are going to be several really big glaring flaws, and you really want to catch those, but they have a lot of little minor flaws also. And the more you catch, the better you are in writing your essay. But make sure you catch some of the major flaws. Okay. Now, I bet most of you are not trained in argument. Anybody here a debater or a law degree? So what you're looking for is just common sense. You don't need to use technical terms. You might know some logical fallacies. You don't need to say it. just describe it. So like, for example, if the if the paragraph was relying on some surveys, you don't have to be a statistician to talk about those surveys. You just challenge the common sense of the survey. Like, well, did they just ask the people that lived downtown? Because that one doesn't represent the entire state and their feelings. So it could be non-representative. But you describe it and paint a picture of how it was flawed. You don't just say, well, it could be non-representative. You paint the picture and describe how it could have been non-representative, how they could have messed up that survey. And so that's kind of what you're doing. You're looking for the things that are wrong in the argument and expressing it in common sense, everyday terms. And by the way, they always say, discuss how well reasoned you find the argument. You never find it well reasoned, okay? It's always ripping apart someone's argument. So here, the things you're going to be making, the points are essentially what's wrong. And then you also still illustrate why it's wrong, but you definitely are just ripping someone apart, okay? Now, that's probably a new kind of essay for most of you that you haven't been trained on. But remember, there's hundreds of samples on the ETS website. You can actually get really good at finding the flaws, because even though every new essay prompt is truly a new situation, the thing is, the flaws are still logically the same flaws. It might have like a correlation causation, comparing apples to oranges, bad use of numbers, percentages versus actual numbers. They might have had a flawed survey or flawed experiment. They may have had a time frame that was too short or too long. There's things like that that you can just rip apart. Okay, so now on both of the essays, I want to just quickly mention how you're graded. So the first thing is, this is going to sound weird, you're graded by a person and a computer. And what they do is they average those two scores. And unless there's a discrepancy. If there's a discrepancy, they toss out the computer and bring in a second person and then average the two real people. That's how your score is actually calculated on test day. But essentially, there's 5 things that you're graded on. One is how well you make your points. There's also how well you support your points. There's the organization of the passage. Now, that's more than just paragraphs. Paragraphs definitely matter, but it's also transitions and logical sequence and all of that. Okay. You're also graded on how well you put your sentences together. So there's actually 2 parts of this one. They want to make sure you have a good variety of syntax. So what they mean there is a mix of long and short sentences, writing that just has a flow to it. That's hard to teach, but that's something they're looking for. And then they also want solid vocabulary. The last thing is grammar. So you are tested on that you don't have any major grammar errors, although they actually forgive 1 or 2. If you have 1 or 2 errors, they forgive it. But if there's lots of grammar errors, they start docking you. Vocabulary is part of what you're graded on, though. So can I give you a hint? Use big words. So everybody now has 30 seconds to figure out how to say that with bigger words. I just said it with 3 really small words. How can you say use big words with bigger words?
Use complicated vocabulary.
Okay, good. You got complicated vocabulary. You still used use, but that's okay. Can you think of another verb to replace use? Utilize.
Utilize.
Yeah, employ. There's all sorts of different ways to say it. Now, sometimes it just feels like you're... So I personally feel like I can tell when someone is just broken out the thesaurus and cut and pasted words in to make it sound smarter, but it actually is part of what you're graded on. So yeah, do it. Okay.
Does that mean that there's access to a thesaurus on
No,
the
there is
test?
not.
Okay.
There's no spell check or grammar check either. You're not graded on spelling, by the way. How about that? Okay. So we're going to shift over now and talk about verbal. So verbal is...
Wait, sorry, Phil.
Go ahead.
Did you just say you're not graded on spelling?
I did say that.
So what would be considered a grammar error then? Just improper use of commas or words?
So it would be more things like dangling modifiers, subjects and verbs not agreeing, bad use of pronouns, lack of parallelism, incorrect verb tense. Here's the big one, probably, sentence fragments or run-on sentences. That actually is a really...
I have a
Go ahead. I have another question.
So can you use a fragment artistically? Like sometimes when you use them, it adds just a little something, like it emphasizes, or do you know if they have a stance on ending a sentence with a preposition, because there's disagreement on whether or not that's allowed?
I don't believe they have a problem with that.
Okay.
Can I just say, I love being playful with language, especially on the issue essay.
Mm-hmm.
I actually, if you can be playful with language, you're up there in your writing ability, and it will come across to your reader.
Okay.
Yeah. So I personally love that. I've not seen many students do it. And by the way, I'm not telling you should. So,
it's a risk.
But can I just tell you a funny story? Have any of you seen the movie Legally Blonde with Reese Witherspoon? So in that movie, there's a scene where they're preparing for the LSAT, and they actually use real LSAT questions. By the way, they use real LSAT questions from the actual LSAT that I took. My score was a 180. She only gets a 179. So, but the funny thing is, I don't know if you remember, but in the movie, she's applying to Harvard Law School. And you always do a personal statement as part of your law school application. But instead of writing a personal statement, she does a video presentation to tell them who she is. I don't know if you remember that scene. But it turns out in the real world, the next year, a bunch of people applied to Harvard Law School with video presentations. Not any of them got in. So be a little careful being too creative sometimes. So I think that's a funny story. Anyway, back to this, the verbal section on the test. So the verbal section on the test is really testing two things. It's testing reading and it's testing vocabulary. Okay. So, hey, it's your favorite movie ever? Well, any movie with Reese Witherspoon in it is my favorite. So, so there's reading and vocabulary. So reading comprehension is a skill that's tested on every test that I'm aware of, pretty much. You do it on your ACT, you do it on your SAT, your GMAT, GRE, LSAT, MCAT, DAT. Apparently it's a skill that you need for grad school. The reading is broken down into several passages on each section. Now, they are of different lengths. So in reading, you have some passages, so we're just talking reading now. You have some passages that are just short, like 2 or 3 lines long. Those always have a single question after them. And then you have some passages that are like 35 lines long, and those giant ones always have 4 questions after them. And there's some that have 2 or 3. So generally, the longer the passage, the more questions you get, okay? Because this takes quite a while to read, so they can't just give you 1 question. They have to give you 4. Because if they only gave you 1 question, that might be a good one to skip. So they give you 4 questions. You can't really skip 4 questions all at once, so you need to do it and do your best. Now, the passages themselves are about lots of different topics. You definitely will have some science passages. You'll have history, literature, so a lot of social science. I swear I know way more about female labor in 1800s England than the average person. And it's because that is like a really popular topic on the GMAT and the GRE. So, and I know about the different organizations that were protecting female workers. And it's just, that's the kind of thing that you're going to read, okay? Science, they never get too in-depth in the science. They'll talk about science, but you don't need to know it in order to still get every point. And that is true. You never need to know anything about the topics in order to get every point. The questions themselves, there's some various types. They love to ask, what can be inferred? What would the author agree with? What did the author actually say? What was the main point? So all of those types, okay? But they actually have a couple of formats. One of the formats is, what can be inferred? And there's 5 answer choices. You select the answer that can be inferred. But they might say what can be inferred, and instead of giving you 5 answers, they only give you 3. Did you also know I drew boxes instead of ovals? On the GRE, the whole test, if they have boxes, that is a visual reminder, and there'll also be instructions above that question that say this, that you're supposed to select all that apply. So when there's boxes, you may have to select A and C to get the point. If it's ovals, you only ever select 1. Okay. Unfortunately, on these ones, there's no partial credit. So even if you get one of them right, you still miss the point because you didn't get the other one. Okay. So that's kind of how it works. There's a rare question type that says select the sentence in the passage that da-da-da-da-da. And for that one, the way you actually answer is you hover above the passage and until it highlights the sentence that you want. You click it and lock it in, and that's how you select the sentence. So something you can do on a computer, but not otherwise. So that's reading. There's definitely some clues to reading, things you want to do, but in the end, it is just reading. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is vocabulary. So in the verbal section, I would say vocabulary are about 60% of the questions. Reading is the other 40%. So it's heavier on vocabulary. I'm guessing that some of you have pretty excellent vocabularies and some of you do not. So when I started my study, I have to tell you, I read a lot as a kid. I mean, a lot. So I was a great reader, I thought. I also had a law degree before I ever took the GRE, which is technically a doctorate. Did you know anybody else who took the GRE with already a doctorate under their belt? And guess what I found? I didn't know a lot of these words. I was like, what? What are these words they're coming up with here? It's an academic's vocabulary they're testing. What you would read if you're reading a scholarly journal. So I have to break it to you. Part of studying for the GRE, this is what we give out in the class, a box of 500 vocabulary words. You need to memorize words. It is just part of studying for the test. Now, I personally memorized 500 new words. It took me about a month to do, and it was pretty intense. I remember days my brain felt like Jell-O. The reason my brain felt like jello was because I hadn't been keeping up. So as I got close to my test, I had one day that I had to memorize 200 words. That is not a fun day. But a few days later, I went to take my actual GRE. I sat out in the car with all 500 words as flashcards, and I went through the entire stack and knew every word. Then I walked into the test and saw a bunch of those words. Words that I did not know 1 month prior, and now I knew. Okay? So, I am literally just turning to a random page. Well, I have to get away from math until I get to a verbal page. Okay. This is a random page. Anxious, confident, thrilled about, keen on, elated by. These are easy ones. Complete, fleeting, momentary, premature, trivial, total. Well, this is the easiest page I ever turned to just randomly. Okay, so let me turn you to a page where I know it's hard. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you some of the words on this one question. So, by the way, this is literally all on one question. Sorry, if I can find that one. So, I'm literally choosing the hardest question in this whole book. Okay, so don't get too intimidated here. Taciturnity, volubility, pellucidity, prolixity, prodigality. How you doing? Anybody know all of those words? I'd be impressed if you did. How about intractable, austerity? Anybody know what austere means?
Austere, isn't it? Well, it can be like austere measures like no food, no money, but it can also be like aloof and condescending. I was an English teacher.
Yeah, it definitely has that attitude to it, doesn't it?
No.
Or it could be like France and Germany imposing austerity measures on Greece. So Nate just typed something in. A YouTube tutor named Greg Matt has a list of 840 words you can study for free. There are other lists that are free too. You can go on Quizlet. You probably know Quizlet. There's actually some excellent lists there for free. So we obviously provide a list. It's just easier that way, I thought. So by the way, if you're going to use Quizlet, look for somebody named Brainiac. I don't know who Brainiac is, but they have actually solid lists of GRE vocabulary words for free also. So Nate, thanks for that addition there. All right. So in the vocabulary, I should actually tell you how the questions are essentially structured. It is never, ever where you just are given a word and you have to choose its synonym. That's not how it goes. They always have essentially a passage. Then the passage has blanks, and you have to choose from a list of words that can go up in that blank. Okay. Now, there's different forms here. There's some that have one blank and 5 answers, so you just choose the one answer that goes up in that blank. They have some that have one blank, but now you have the boxes. Remember what the boxes mean. So this one actually tells you to specifically choose exactly 2 that fit the meaning of the sentence and produce sentences that are alike in meaning. They also have some that have 2 blanks, but then each blank has 3 answer choices. Again, no partial credit. And then they have some that have a 3rd blank and then 3 more choices for that 3rd blank. These ones tend to be pretty time consuming because they're like a paragraph long and there's just a lot going on in those. Okay, so that's essentially vocabulary. I'm gonna move. Are there any questions about the verbal section? I know I didn't cover that thoroughly. We just didn't have time. Today's an introduction. So any questions? Yeah. Go ahead.
Phil, I have a question. So if I'm looking at the workbook for, the course, obviously I've paid and have your workbook. Am I supposed to just learn those words that you suggest for week 1, or are those in addition to the flashcards?
So everyone that I do for the homework is one of the flashcards.
Perfect. I just hadn't correlated. I wondered if that was true, so I can just pull those out and then use them.
Yeah, but we only do as part of the class 20 a week together.
Yeah.
So that'll only add up to 140 out of the total 500. So
Lovely. Okay.
the reason I did that is because I used to try to get all my students to do 500 words. It turns out it never happened. So I'm
No
like,
way.
okay, I have to find a balance here where students will actually do it. So we
Okay.
actually, as part of the course, memorize 20 words and do a quiz on it the following week. But yeah.
Okay. Does the course flow start next week?
So this is technically week 1, so you'll have homework.
Okay.
And so we'll be on to week 2 next week.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. So this is always important stuff, the kind of all the introduction stuff. So I always lead off with that in week 1. But we're in about 5 minutes going to be talking about some instruction. So, all right. So just talk about the math section in general. Let's start with the areas of math that you're tested on. Okay. This is what everybody's always worried about. First thing is arithmetic. I am quite serious. This is elementary school stuff. Now, you might say to yourself, I get a calculator, and calculators are actually really nice, but there's some things they don't do well. Do you know what especially they don't do well? Fractions. So you have to do stuff like finding common denominators and adding fractions together. Do you know what they do really well? Decimals. So guess what you almost never see on the GRE? A decimal question. They never give you a question you can just type into your calculator and get the answer. Okay. There's also like your calculator, converting it to a percent can be confusing. So there's a lot of percent questions. How about remainders? When was the last time you literally did a remainder? There are remainder questions on the test. You actually need to do long division, like 217 divided by 23. You have to know how to do that and find a remainder. I had to relearn this when I started my study. I had forgotten how to do long division by hand. I know that's silly, but I had forgotten. Because why would you do it once you have a calculator? Next is algebra. So you just need to be solid at algebra. Solving equations and systems of equations and quadratic equations, all that. Geometry. So you got to know your formulas and your shapes and be able to work with them. They ask some pretty creative, cool questions in geometry. Then there's statistics. So this is stuff like averages and medians and ranges. Nothing like you got into in your stats class. No t-values or whatever those things are. But they do include permutations, combinations, probabilities. There's some pretty tough stuff here in stats. There's also number properties. So this is stuff like odds and evens, positives and negatives, absolute values, prime numbers, prime factors, factors and multiples, square roots, exponents. You've just got to be very fluent in that. Then there's some word problems. This might be things like two trains coming together. When do they meet? It could be like there's these two sets of people that overlap. So there's people in the overlap group, but how do you account for them? Things along those lines. There's also charts and graphs. Now, charts and graphs are always either a stats question or a percent question. But then you have to also read a chart to get the information you need to solve the question. And then you do the math. So every time there's a chart or a graph, you also are doing math. You're not just reading a chart. That is the complete list of question types. Is anybody disappointed there's no trig, no calculus? Yeah, it's actually high school math. You were better prepared for all of this right when you took the ACT than you are now after college. College does not prepare you for the GRE. Not at all. It's not designed to. So, now there are different question formats on the test. So the first format is just here's the regular problem, here's the 5 answers, right? Choose the correct answer. They could ask the problem and do the boxes where you select all that apply. And I've seen questions where there were 6 boxes and the correct answer was all 6. So, or it could be just 1 out of the 6. So you just never know. You have to actually really work it out. Those are inherently harder. Then there's an occasional one where they ask the math question and you actually type in the answer. There might be 1 or 2 of those per section. They're pretty rare, but there's no strategy at all. You have to know exactly how to do the math to get the point. Okay? And then there's one more question that's really common, and as far as I can tell, it's unique to the GRE. They call it quantitative comparison. They give you 2 values, A and B. So it might look like this, X and 140. And you have to determine which one's bigger. Now, almost always there's some additional information up here. A story, some equations, or a picture if it's geometry. Then you have to determine which one's bigger. So right now, you can't tell me if X is bigger or smaller than 140 because I didn't give you the additional info. So there are 4 answers. A means A is bigger, B means B is bigger, C means they're the same. And then there's answer choice D. I call it the insidious answer choice. Okay, vocabulary, what does insidious mean?
Sinister, evil.
Yes, it is. Okay, so that is not enough information. And that answer is right as much as the others are. So you might not, even with this additional info, be able to tell if X is bigger than 140. Maybe you can, but maybe not. I actually see a lot of students who are just learning this, and they actually choose D way more often than they should because they just don't know how to do the math. So they're just like, it must not be doable. So just check yourself if you're choosing D too often. But with that said, it is often the right answer too. So, all right. So we have about a half hour left. I want to actually do a little bit of math. I also usually spend some time on the first week talking about methods of memorization. I'm just a little behind on today's presentation. So those of you that are already part of the course, one of the videos for week 1 is how to memorize words. So I'm just going to actually point you to that video and instead of actually doing it here live. I'll occasionally do that if I don't have time to get to everything in class because everything is pre-recorded on demand.
Hey Phil, quick question before you jump into that. I just wanted to see, because it sounds like you've helped a lot of students get through preparing for the GRE. So what time frame would you recommend for studying before you take the GRE?
So ideally, maybe 3 months plus. So I organize my course as 2 months of course, but I don't recommend taking the test right immediately after the course. I want you to then do some practice testing and all of that. The course is designed to teach you how to actually solve the problems. And then you need to learn how to get a maximum score with those skills, if that makes sense. And that only comes with practice testing. I strongly recommend as many practice tests as you can do. On the ETS website, there are 2 free practice tests. Sorry. That alarm is part of my diet. One of the things I'm doing for my diet, I'm not eating after 5 o'clock. So that's my 4:30 alarm so that I can go pig out for the next half hour. No, I don't pig out, but it's like, okay, you're about to give up food for the rest of the day. Yeah, like Bartholomew saying, just scared of the quant section. It is scary. but it's also very learnable. That is kind of one of the points I'm trying to make. Wait, I was also making another point before my alarm went off. And now I've lost my train of thought. So we're going to now talk a little bit about strategy. We'll probably talk about this for about 15 minutes. Then I want to spend about 10 minutes showing you how the course works and the website works and how you interact with that. And then we'll take like 5 minutes at the end to invite the people that are just sitting in today. If they are interested in joining us, we'll give them a discount code and stuff. So that's what we've got for the next half hour. So those of you who do have class notes, please turn to week 1, page 2. And we're going to talk about strategic problem solving. The idea here is how to get math points even when you don't know how to do the math. And this is going to happen to you on test day, almost guaranteed. You'll run into a question, you'll be like, I have no chance at that. But how can you possibly still just get the point? Because that's what matters, is if you select the correct answer. So there are various strategies that can help you just get points on test day. We'll be talking about that as we go through the course. Today, we're going to be talking about a specific strategy, and that is use your own numbers. But we also talk about that next week. So there's 2 applications of using your own numbers. Today, we're going to do use your own numbers on regular problem solving questions. Next week, we do use your own numbers on the value comparison, which one's bigger questions. That's probably even the more important application of this concept, but this is a way to just get points even when you don't know how to do the math. The next concept we do on week 3 is back solving. Have any of you ever back solved points? It's a great way to get an occasional point on the GRE. You can't do it on all questions, but sometimes you just get a point. And then in week 5, we talk about estimation, just ballparking it, which is also a way to get points even when you don't know how to do the math. But today we are going to start focusing on the strategy of using your own numbers. So I'm going to do a screen share, and those again, of you that are that have the book, this is on page 2. So we're going to look at this example here, and this is, by the way, an example I've written personally. Okay, you should be able to see that. So here's what it says. If a plus b equals c and a minus b equals d, then a times b divided by 2 equals what? Now, can I just tell you something I do before I ever start the question? I look at the answers. So I'm looking at the answers and I see what they look like. Now, the reason I look at the answers is they can often give me hints on how I can solve the problem. And there is something in the answer choices that is screaming at me that I might just want to use my own numbers. Now, the thing is, though, there's also just a straight math way of solving this. I bet we have some of the students here watching that are doing algebra on their scratch paper at home. Has anybody solved it algebraically yet? Now, I have to tell you, I've done this problem right here with thousands of students. I'm not exaggerating. I've done it with thousands of students, and these are either college graduates or soon to be college graduates. And I would say about 15% to 20% of that group are confident in solving this the math way. They tend to be people who are more mathy, math majors, engineers, econ majors, things like that. But I would say the large majority of my students look at this and are not exactly sure how to approach it. By the way, it's not the simplest algebra. You need to actually know what you're doing. Okay, so I wrote the question. I do know how to do the algebra. But if I saw this question on test day, I would never do the algebra because of the way the answer choices look. So here's what's in the answer choices that is different. They all have variables in them. Okay, so there's variables in the answer choices. Whenever I see that, I'm like, well, maybe I'll just plug in my own numbers. Okay, so you should also be able to see me, a little screen of me. So hopefully I'll write big enough that you can see this. I'm just going to choose numbers. When I say use your own numbers, I'm just like, you make them up. I'm just going to make up numbers for A, B, C, and D. I'll start with A is 5 and B is 2. Nice small numbers. Why make my math harder? So I like small prime numbers personally. So what do you think I should make C? Any ideas? Well, okay, Danielle has it. C has to be 7. Now, the reason it has to be 7 is if you look back here, it says A plus B equals C. So whatever I chose for A and B, they have to add up to C, and they also have to subtract to D. So what does D have to be? 3. Thanks, Valea. I hope I said your name correctly. So we actually now have a set of numbers that exactly fits the setup in the problem. So what we can do now is just solve the problem. The question was, what's A times B divided by 2? So all you do is you plug in your own numbers. That's 5 times 2 divided by 2, which comes out as 5. The correct answer is 5. So now guess what you do? You just circle the answer choice that says 5 by plugging in C's and D's into the answer choice. Now, just because we're a little short on time, I'm going to just tell you what the correct answer is. It's answer choice D. So everybody just take a second, plug in 7 and 3 into answer choice D. So you should get 49 minus 9, which is 40, divided by 8 is 5. That's the correct answer. And we just solved this problem and got the correct answer. And this is how I always solve problems, just like this. Have any of you ever solved problems like that before? Or you're like, this is magic?
Yes, I had a teacher that used to think this way, and I'm dyslexic, so numbers are not that friendly. So this is great. It's a great strategy.
So what it does is it just gets you the correct answer. That's all we care about, is getting the correct answer. So that's kind of what I'm in the business of doing. I have no pride in how I get my point. I just get my point. Okay, I'm gonna, man, I have not managed time well today. I'm gonna skip question 2. There's a pre-recorded video, of course, that has all these questions done. So if you want to see question 2 and the ones we're skipping, you can watch that pre-recorded video. But I'm going to give you a slightly different example of this. So this is a percent question. So let's do this one together. It says if B is greater than or equal to 5, then B divided by 40 plus B divided by 20 is what percent of the original B? Oh, that's fine if you need to go to work. It's real life. Oh, I'm glad it helped. Great. So I want a volunteer to just choose what B is. First person to type in what B is what we're going to use. John says 4. Nate says 6. So John, I have to say, B had to be greater than or equal to 5. So 4 technically was outside the parameters. So I'll go with Nate's 6. Okay. So Nate chose poorly. So I hate 6. 6 is just going to make our math really hard. Because here's what we have to do. We have to do 6 over 40 plus 6 over 20. We have to find a common denominator, and that'll actually add up to 18/40. And then we still have to answer 18/40 is what percent of 6? I don't know. It's hard math. So if you're ever in a percent question, there is a better number to choose. Can anybody guess what it is on a percent question? I'm trying to give it away. So Mike and Nate both are saying 10. 10 is a better number, but not a perfect number. What do you think is the perfect number on a percent question? 100. Nate's got it. John's got it. Danielle's got it. All percents are based on percent of 100. So watch what happens if I just say B is 100. I get 100 over 40 plus 100 over 20. Now, this is where you have a calculator, and that's nice. This is 2.5 plus 5 is 7.5. So the question then is, 7.5 is what percent of 100? It is 7.5% of 100. You already have your answer. It's answer choice B. So if you go back and you had 18/40 is what percent of 6? Well, it turns out it's 7.5% of 6. That's hard math. You don't want to make your math hard. You want to make it as easy as possible. So in a percent question, I almost always just choose 100. Okay, so I'm going to do one more example. Okay, let's skip down to this one. Okay, so let me make sure that's all on the screen. Okay, so if x is a prime number greater than 3, then x cubed minus x must be divisible by which of the following? 5, 6, 7, 9, or 16. 5, 6, 7, 9, or 16. X cubed minus x. So now I've done this problem with, I wrote this about a year ago. So I've done it with probably 1,000 students. I've actually had one student that knew the math way to solve this. Anybody else here know the math way to solve this? To factor out x cubed minus x? Okay, so the rest of us then, we have one way to solve it, and that is just choose our own numbers. So we know that x is a prime number greater than 3. How about 5? That's a prime number greater than 3. So let's just make x 5 and solve the problem. Okay, so then I plug it in here to x cubed minus x. This is where your calculator comes in play. 125 minus 5 is 120. Guess what that's divisible by? It's divisible by 5, but there's a problem. It's also divisible by 6. It's not divisible by 7, 9, or 16. But we got 2 correct answers, but this is a problem that only has 1 correct answer. So what did we do wrong? Nothing. We didn't do anything wrong. We just got rid of 3 wrong answers. How do we get rid of 1 more wrong answer? Choose another x. This happens actually. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say maybe we just try saying that x is 6.
Well, it has to be prime, so we can't use 6, but let's make 7, for example. Okay. So if you use 7, calculator will tell you that's 343 minus 7, which is 336. I don't need to check these 3 anymore. 336 is not divisible by 5, but it's still divisible by 6. Now, you can try this with all sorts of prime numbers. Whatever prime number you work with, it's always divisible by 6 when you take the prime number cubed minus itself. It's magic. But we didn't need to know the math behind that. We just started plugging in some primes until we got to the answer. But I just wanted to demonstrate this, that sometimes you have to choose more than one number to get all the way to the correct answer. Okay. So, by the way, you're going to be doing practice this week, and some of that practice will include using your own numbers in problems. Okay. So I now want to actually talk about how the course works. I'm going to probably take about 10 minutes doing this, walking you through the website and everything. So the first thing, and this is kind of weird, this Zoom link that you had for today was only for this first day of class. Every other day of class is a different link, and those of you that are signed up for the class should already have that, but there's other ways to get it. So one thing is, Angela, who's also on the call, She handles all this. She will send out an email to everybody in the course to make sure they have the proper link. We used to use this link for the first week since we are doing this for marketing. I know that's confusing, but it's what we have to do for this Zoom. The other way you can do it is if you can just log into our website, then every link on the website is the other week's Zooms. Okay. So the way the course now works is you're going to have basically things going on. You're always going to have the lecture. Now the lecture is going to be delivered live, me here in my basement, every Tuesday from 3 to 5 for the next 8 weeks. Okay. But there's something else that's delivered live every week, and that is, I'm going to put it down here because it happens on Saturday. That is the drill session, which is again just the same link. We don't use a different link for the drill session. And I'll show you again when we get on the website where that comes from. Okay. In fact, let me stop the share for now. Okay, but between the lecture and the drills, there's actually quite a bit we're going to do. The first 4 weeks all have a quiz that goes along with it, so you can practice those skills that you were learning that week. I'll show you kind of where that goes. And then there's homework. Now, homework consists of things like practice tests, practice problems, and memorizing words. Now, the way you find your homework is out of this book. Okay, so this is the same thing I had up as a screen share. If you go a few pages further on, you'll get the homework for week 1. So this is on page 6 of this. Week 1, we do something very different than the other weeks. We're going to be doing a practice test. We want you to get a starting score, and that is a lot of time you're going to be devoting to that. So there's that. There's also a quiz on page 6. And then there's the words to memorize on page 7. Okay. So lecture, quiz, homework, drills. Now, let me take you to our website really quickly. Okay. So I've logged into the GRE. So the first thing is it's arranged by week, and today we're on week 1. Okay. Now you're about to see something shocking. I apologize, but remember I said earlier in the lesson that I'm way heavier now than I have been in the past? I'm going to show you what I looked like when I was skinny about 3 years ago, because I recorded this video here. Yep, that's me. So like this is me doing the lecture you just saw. Here we're working 2, 3. The same problem like that. Okay. So everything is pre-recorded. Wow, I was so skinny. I did the keto diet, which is incredibly effective, but I couldn't sustain it. All right. Anyway, so everything that's on the lecture here is everything I do live is also recorded. All of week 1, we have the welcome video. We have the Zoom link right here. The general information, we did that. The quant section, the strategy, the verbal section, how to memorize. And I also have week 1 quiz explanations. And then there's also this one, which I call is the drills. Remember, the drills are also recorded. We're going to be doing those live on Saturday from noon to 2. But if you want to have a version I did like 5 months ago, you can watch that version anytime on demand. Okay, so you don't have to be there Saturday noon to 2. I'm assuming some of you have lives, jobs, fun to have on the weekend, but I'll be here doing the drills live, but it's always available. Okay, so then the next week we'll start off our class with a vocab quiz of the words you memorized, and then just jump into it. Okay, are there any questions then of kind of like the steps you're going to be doing as part of the course?
Yeah, quick question. You'd mentioned that for the first week, and I'm assuming later on in the class as well, we'll be doing full practice tests. Where do we take those? Because I didn't see that on the website.
Yeah, so on the homework for week 1, it directs you where to do it. So on the official website, there's 2 free and 3 paid practice tests, so 5 total. Those are all computer adaptive ones, but there's also 1 paper test. And so we're going to use the paper test for our initial one. It's hard to find, so I do the link for you in the homework. I'll give you a QR code that'll take you directly to that page. And then, so it's a little different timing, but the questions are the same. Different number of questions per section, but just follow that timing. That's just part of learning the test, is getting that first practice test score. By the way, it can be frustrating. Don't get too frustrated or intimidated after that first one. All right.
Take those first 2 practice tests as many times as you want, or is it just you have 2 practice tests?
So I believe you can take them both twice, if I'm recalling. So it'll reset, but the second time through, you will have seen the questions before, right? And so it's not the same. And Nate did have a question too. Can you take the course at your own pace? Absolutely. I would say at least half of our students are just taking the course online on their own at their own pace. We're just delivering this live via Zoom, because usually I teach live classes at different locations, but we just haven't been able to here. So Nate, absolutely do it in sections. It won't replicate the real test, but you can do it in sections because this is just for your benefit. So it's not like the real test. So, all right, I'm going to bring in Angela. Angela, you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure.
You want to tell them about the course and do a discount code and stuff?
Okay, I think you already just talked about the course. So I don't really know what else to say except maybe just to recap what Phil said. So the advantages of taking the course is, first, you're taught by Phil. He scored perfect on the GRE, LSAT, and GMAT.
No, I'm not quite perfect on the GMAT yet.
Oh, sorry, that's right. He got 99 percentile.
I missed one question.
Yeah. And you have access to his personal phone number, his email, his text, so you can communicate with him as a paid student. You with the course, you receive 8 weeks of lectures, drills, and homework. It's set up in an 8-week course, but you have lifetime access to it. So let's say you go through the 8-week course and you want to go through the class again, you're more than welcome to do that for as long as you need. Or even though it's in an 8-week format, since it's pre-recorded, the online version, you could stretch it out if you wanted to. You could condense it if you wanted to as well. You get all of these books with the course. It's included in the price of the class. So you get the official GRE Guide bundle, which includes the main book, and then a math supplement and a verbal supplement. You also get the flashcards. And then you also get our Test Perfect workbook. And in here, you take notes. Your homework assignment is in here. It's like a syllabus, and also like formulas that you need to memorize and things of that nature. I think that's the main thing. And just to reiterate, this course round, so we always have everything pre-recorded and online. So literally, if you signed up today, you could see the entire course from week 1 through week 8. However, we're also offering a live broadcast option, which is similar to what you participated today. So if you wanted to do similar work to today's lesson, where you have interaction with other students and also with Phil, it's 3 to 5 every week on Tuesdays. And then on Saturdays, we have drill sessions from noon to 2 p.m. Noon to 2 p.m. Yeah. And people often ask, what are drill sessions? Well, what they are is we take these 2 thinner books and we go from one question to the other. So it's like just like exercise drills or military drills, you just get practice. So that's that. And then one of the biggest benefits of the course, did you show this, Phil?
Oh, I didn't show him this.
Oh, okay. This is one of the biggest benefits of the course. So he's going to switch over. But this official GRE Guide Book, this is where all your homework questions are taken from. And there's literally hundreds of questions in here. Now, what Phil has done is he's gone through and he has answered every single question in this book and shows you online how to answer those questions. So similar to how he demonstrated how he answered the question in today's problems, he does that for every single question in this book. Sometimes he'll answer it the official math way, but he'll also answer it the strategic way, similar to what he showed you today. He showed you how to get the answer, even though you didn't need to know how to do complicated algebra. So that's a huge benefit of the class that students have told us. They really appreciated Phil answering all those hundreds of questions. So, so that's what you get with the class. The cost of the class, and like I said, you can take the class as long as you need. It's $4.95, but we have a special promotion going on. So if you enter the code online promo, that'll give you $100 off the class. So that'll bring the price down to $3.95. And we're gonna make this offer available until the start of next week. So which is the first day of class.
Well, the second day of class.
Oh, sorry, the second day of class, so next Tuesday. But I think that's it.
Try to do it soon so that we can get your materials mailed out as soon as possible.
Yes, actually, yeah, I'm going to really encourage you to sign up today if possible, latest this weekend, because you're going to want to get your books. And especially on Saturday, if you're planning to join us on Saturday, you're going to need the books for the drill sessions. If you order today, we can get it out in 1 to 3 day mail